The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. And they told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." And then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. And then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." And when they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. And then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. A few minutes ago, we sang, "We three kings of Orient are, bearing gifts we traverse afar." Is it true or false that they were kings? Is it true or false that there were three? Is it true or false that they came from afar? Will you think with me about this text for a few minutes? It begins with, "In the time of King Herod." Well, that would be Herod the Great, who was named King of Judea and King of the Jews by Caesar Augustus, some 35 years before this story took place. Herod was a tyrant, a despot, who was desperate to do anything he could do to maintain his power and his position, even if that meant murdering his wife Mary Ann and 3 of his sons, which he did. But he had successfully fought off 2 attacks from his political enemies, and he knew that he was the King of the Jews. And then in our text, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. Well, the Greek word describing those men is magoi, which we transliterate as magi. And as we will see later in the story, they were not particularly wise, and their number, it's unknown. The Bible never specifies how many people came. The Western Christian Church, which we are in, refers to 3. The Eastern Christian Church refers to 12. So where did the idea that there were 3 magi come from? From the number of gifts they brought. The magi were astrologers. They were interpreters of dreams. They were a type of priesthood to Persian kings, but they were clearly not kings. The phrase "magi from the east" turns out to be one of the most important phrases in this entire reading. From the east referred to the region miles, many miles east of Jerusalem, across the deserts of Jordan into the area that is now Arabia. And most importantly, they were Gentiles. Our reading from Isaiah 60 said, "And Gentiles will come to thy light." The idea that they were kings may have come from the rest of that verse, which says, "And kings to the brightness of thy rising." But the Magi were neither kings, nor does Isaiah, as we will see, refer to Jesus. They ask Herod, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews?" True or false? Was that a wise question? The preacher Alice McKenzie says, "They stride into Jerusalem like a person wandering barefoot into a snake pit, asking, 'Where's the baby king who will replace you?'" And the author Frederick Buechner says, "The foolishness of the wise is perhaps nowhere better illustrated than by the way the Magi went to Herod the Great, King of the Jews, to ask about the whereabouts of the holy child who had just been born King of the Jews to replace him. On a scale of wiseness from 1 to 10, their question would have been about a 2. In King James, the King James Version, the Magi then said, "For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." Well, the Magi were from the east, probably Arabia, and if they saw a star in the east and they followed the star eastward, they would have ended up in India, but they ended up in Jerusalem, and so they obviously went west. How do we explain that? Well, it's because in Hebrew, the word for east also means the rising. So the text should be translated as, we saw its star, or we saw the star at its rising. And that's the way the NRSV translates it. But importantly, we have no idea how the Magi knew that they were looking for a baby who had been born King of the Jews. Somebody, maybe angels, told them. But somebody did tell them, otherwise they wouldn't have asked Herod that question, "Where's the baby who's been born to replace you?" And then our text continues. When Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. The Greek word that's translated as frightened is used only one other time in Matthew's entire gospel, and it's to describe the terror that Jesus' disciples had when they saw him walking on the water toward him in the night. So Herod gathers his own scholars, the chief priests and the scribes, and asks where the long-awaited Messiah is supposed to be born. And they probably said, well, not in Jerusalem. They're off by about 9 miles. In that day, the distance between Jerusalem and Bethlehem was about 9 miles. Now it's about 6 miles, with better roads. They said they're reading the wrong text, because Isaiah 60 isn't about the Messiah. It was written right after Jews had returned from exile in Babylon and had found Jerusalem in ruins. And Isaiah was prophesying how Jerusalem would again flourish and become a center of commerce where people from all over the east would come to do business. The chief priests and the scribes said the place where they should be looking is found in the book of the prophet Micah, who wrote, "Now you, O Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least of the leaders of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." And so here Herod sends him off to Bethlehem with instructions to return with information for him about the location of the baby, so he could ostensibly go and worship the baby. Well, the star led the Magi the 9 miles, and they finally get to Bethlehem. It's been said if they had been 3 wise women, they would have first of all asked for directions and gotten there on time. They would have cleaned the stable. They would have helped deliver the baby. They would have brought a casserole, and they would have brought appropriate gifts, something like a baby blanket and some diapers and baby wipes. But no, there they were, 3 men with extravagant gifts for a baby so poor that his bed had been straw in a cow's manger, a cow's feeding trough. Well, when the Magi saw the child, they knelt down and worshiped him. And then they presented the gifts they had brought, gifts suitable for a king. Gold, which had great monetary value, frankincense and myrrh, which were expensive, fragrant resins from trees that grew only in southern Arabia. Nobody in Bethlehem needed or wanted those gifts. The gold, yes, but not the others. But these were gifts for a king. No one knows if Matthew realized as he wrote his gospel how the gold could have represented Jesus as the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, and the frankincense as incense for Jesus as our great high priest, and myrrh as the oil that would anoint Jesus at his death. But the more important point is not the gifts themselves, but that the Magi, Arab Gentiles, had been led there by the light to see and worship the child who had been born the King of the Jews. And we will never know if the Magi had an epiphany as they realized that because they, Arab Gentiles, had been led there to worship the child, that he was apparently to be their king also. And if their king, then the king of everyone else. They gave what they had, and then they headed home by a very different way. For us who have worshiped Jesus at his birth, as we did on Christmas, he leads us home by a very different way. A way filled with purpose and meaning, with life and love, until we arrive at our home, where we will live with him eternally. Amen.